Thanks for the introduction. Thank you to Zen Peacemakers for inviting me to come back in. I came in a few years ago to talk about a different book. And as y'all know, I'm here today, as Chloe just shared, to talk about Illuminating Our True Nature, which is a book that came out in June of this year. And the flow for our time together today will be that I will, in a moment, lead a centering that's based on a meditation from the book. I will talk some about the book and the content in the book and what the kleshas are, and just offer a short overview of the kleshas and the Yoga Sutras and why this now, like why focus on the kleshas and the root causes of suffering in this way, in this application. I offer throughout the book now. And I'll also weave in some practices, work with a pranayama practice, a mudra, one asana or posture, which you don't need anything for. So if you're sitting in a chair, that's fine when we get to that part. This is not asana heavy at all. This is really about different parts of the path of yoga, different limbs, and how we can engage them to mitigate suffering, our individual suffering, and of course, our collective suffering. And so I'll share some, we'll practice, and I'll also leave some time for questions. That said, if as I'm explaining something or sharing something, if you have a question that comes up at the moment, you're more than welcome to put that in the chat. I will open that and pay attention to it, and know that there will be a dedicated time for questions near the end of our time together. But I'm pretty good at going with the flow of what might need to happen in the space, and appreciate all of you for being here now. I want to invite us to take a moment, or a few minutes actually, to ground and center and land in our space. And you can be on camera or off camera for this. And your eyes can be open or closed, or a soft gaze on the ground in front. And you can find a posture that would suit you now, that would feel supportive, I'll say, and maybe even comforting right now, if that's possible. The meditation we're going to move through is called a clear sight and true nature meditation. It's based on the first klesha, which is avidya, which I'll share more about. And so for now, just find a way to be in your body. Again, eyes open, eyes closed, soft gaze. Hands can be on your knees. If you're seated, hands could be on the earth. If you're standing, your arms might be down by your side. And I invite you, as we come into this space, to take a few rounds of breath. You can breathe in and open your mouth and breathe out with an audible exhale. You can start to breathe in some other way. But the invitation is to bring your awareness and attention to your breath. And as you bring your awareness and attention to your breath, again, you might be offering audible exhales, just releasing whatever might need to go and honoring your transition from wherever you were or whatever you were doing before you arrived here in this space. And take a few more deep breaths here. And as you do, you might begin to actually lengthen your inhales and exhales, beginning to feel the flow of breath in your body. And as you deepen and lengthen your breath here, I invite you to begin to notice your connection with the earth, maybe your feet or your seat, or an awareness of the ground underneath you. Not just the floor, right, but what is underneath it, the foundation and the layers of dirt and the different layers of the earth. You might even decide you want to draw in some of the earthly energy, some grounding energy into your body. So this earthly energy can collaborate with the breath and begin to nurture your nervous system, to nurture your body and the different layers of self. So the first part of this meditation and this opening is for us to come into ourselves, to begin to connect or reconnect, and also to connect with the earth, the earthly realm, the earthly body, the human, and of course, more than human worlds. And now, as you breathe, I invite you to extend this awareness of the earth, the breath, your body in this particular moment, in this space, to the other beings who are in this space with us now and who will benefit from watching and participating with the recording. Maybe expanding your awareness to the other living beings in your space, furry companions, animals, other humans, energies. And just as you are breathing, inhaling and exhaling, you might come into the awareness these other living beings are inhaling and exhaling. You might even imagine the fall and rise of the chest as we inhale and exhale collectively. That energy, inspiration and aspiration with our inhales. And then this release and emptying and contraction and coming back to center with our exhales. The core of who we are, the drawing in. And beyond the living beings in your space, bring your awareness now to the other beings outside of your space, the trees, the waters, the air, the winds, the sun, the moon. Elements and energies, and perhaps even other living beings in your community, in your space that you interact with. And come into the awareness that we are part of everything that has been, is now, and will be. And our inhales and exhales are part of a continuum, a journey of breath. And part of returning to our true nature is remembering our interconnectedness with all things. The relationship we have with all things, all beings, all energies. Breathing into this for the next few rounds of breath. And for the final few cycles of breath in this meditation, breathing alongside everything and everyone, coming into communion with all beings, all that has been, is now, and will be. I invite you to come back to the truth of who you are. Even if the answer to this question about the truth of who you are may not be completely clear, but coming into the awareness that you can return to, we can return to the truth of who we are through Sangha, community, through practice, through clearing away what causes suffering and mitigating suffering, through doing the inner work to better understand why we suffer. You might tap into this energy of moksha, mukti, liberation, and unbinding from our suffering, and tapping into the radiant light you embody and the truth of who you are. Tapping into the pure consciousness, Purusha, that resides in everyone, everything, all of time and space. And from this place of journeying and inviting yourself to connect more fully to the truth of who you are, you can either keep your hands exactly as they are. If you'd like, you can bring your hands together and into heart center, pressing the palms together. This is Anjali Mudra, which is the mudra that is offered as a practice in response to avidya, the first klesha, which I'll talk about in just a bit. And if you've chosen to press the palms together at your heart center, I invite you to feel your thumbs close to your heart and the energy between your palms. This mudra is often associated with devotion and connection. And I would say coming back to the heart. It is a prayerful mudra and posture and position as the hands are close to the heart and energy is building between them. And from this place, this mudra, this invitation to reconnect to the truth of who you are, I invite you to both set an intention for our time together and to uplift a blessing or prayer or offering from the awareness that there is no separation. We are connected through all of time and space. And so from your heart and in your mind's eye, you can uplift your prayer or blessing. Sealing your intentions, prayers, and blessings to this time and place with 3 deep breaths. And then as you feel ready, gently returning, bringing yourself back, blinking open your eyes. Just taking a moment to reconnect and reorient in your space. Maybe taking in the light or the living beings or the shapes and colors in your space or the temperature. Just allowing yourself to return. Okay, so welcome again. I know Chloe shared a little bit about who I am, and I'll just share a tiny bit more. Although it's like funny to think about this question of who I am or who we are, because there are many different answers to this question and different layers. But I want to contextualize some, the book, some, and my offerings and why the kleshas now, which we'll dive into a lot more. My name is Michelle, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am coming to you from the ancestral land of the Catawba, the Cherwa, the Tutelo, the Saponi, the Occaneechi, and many other tribes in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It is a beautiful late summer day right now. It feels like fall, but it's not yet fall. We're close to it, but definitely feel it in the air. And I have been holding space for transformation for many, many years, over 2 decades, maybe over 3 decades, for a long, long time, given my energy. And I've done that in a lot of the ways that Chloe named in my roles, right? And identities and the work I do in the world as a racial equity educator, as a spiritual teacher, as a yoga practitioner and spiritual practitioner, as a guide, as a writer, as a space who create a person who creates space for healing in a lot of different ways, shamanically, intuitively. And I think what I'm most interested in these days is really focused on collective healing and dreaming in a grounded and tethered way, dreaming our way into a reality where everyone gets to be free. That's what I'll say. Where we can experience and taste and touch and feel collective liberation. I am someone who is very sensitive. And when I say that, I mean I'm sensitive emotionally. I am an empath. And I am often confused about the relative truth and the middle plane where we are on earth and the things that are happening, many of which the patterns that are unfolding that I explore in Illuminating Our True Nature. And I'm also deeply, and people who know me know that I'm deeply heartbroken about separation and polarization. And although I understand systems and what has created separation, which are humans, right? And we make up systems and patterns of trauma that get played out over and over, unless they are interrogated in some way, and unless we do the individual inner work and the collective work to heal, so we can break some of these patterns of trauma and violence and harm. So I'm confused and I'm heartbroken, and I am someone who's quite interested in being in sangha and circles with people who are wanting to desire to dive into the root causes of our suffering, which is the essence of illuminating our true nature, and not just to have like an intellectual conversation about why we suffer, but to explore and then think about, what do we want to practice? What do we want to create? What does dreaming together look like to manifest a reality where everyone can experience liberation and have what they need to not only survive, but to thrive? And how can we think about our uh, what we're doing right now in real time, and the impact of our choices now into the future? Like, how can we consider and be in deep contemplation about the choices we make now, because we understand they will impact future generations? And at the same time, how can we explore what we are embodying and the patterns of behavior that we are operating from, and disrupt patterns so that we can heal our lineages and heal back. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I'm interested in and why I'm here. And I'm going to share a little bit about Illuminating Our True Nature, the body of work, the book, and then talk about the kleshas specifically, which some of you may be very familiar with. This book actually came from, I was teaching about the kleshas. I've taught about the kleshas for many years now, but really had not thought about writing a book about the kleshas. And my editor from Shambhala, which is the publisher that published this book and many of my other books, the editor and I were having a conversation. She saw me teach about the kleshas, and she was really intrigued by my application of the kleshas to what is playing out in this relative plane here, where we are, what humans are doing to one another, the ancestral patterns and embodiment of these kleshas, and the suffering. And the real question, my editor witnessed me in a group, asked the group to think about what klesha are they, what klesha, felt most alive for them individually, but also what are they noticing in the collective? And so she just asked me to sit with whether or not I'd want to write a book about it. And it took a long time for me to say yes to that. It actually didn't take me a long time. It doesn't take me a long time to make decisions like that, but it took me a minute to actually find my place in the conversation about the kleshas and to make an offering like Illuminating Our True Nature. The reason for that mainly is because I have been a yoga practitioner for many, many years, and am someone who thinks about appropriation, and when things are taken from source without a clear understanding of them. And the path of yoga is so expansive and is not directly connected to my blood lineage, as I understand who I am, but is certainly a big part of my life and how I'm oriented through this path of yoga, in particular, in regards to liberation, and how we contextualize the teachings of the path of yoga. And there are different paths of yoga. So I'm talking about the 8-limb path of yoga, which I'll talk more about, but how we contextualize the path of yoga in our lives so we can actualize and create a world in which everyone is free. And so it took me a minute to figure out, am I the person who needs to write a book about the kleshas? And it took 6 chapters, actually. Illuminating Our True Nature has 15 chapters. And it took 6 chapters for me to say, yes, I have something to say about this that I think will be an offering and contribution to the path of yoga. And I have practices that I have practiced for many years, or throughout this process of working through the kleshas as I wrote this book, practices that came to me in a different way, right, channeled and through me, that are rooted in the path of yoga as an offering for us to work through our suffering. And I see klesha, someone might have had a question about that. I will, I'm going to share a screen in a minute. Yeah, klesha. Thank you, Chloe, for doing that. The chat is now open so I can see it. So I mentioned the book has 15 chapters. So it has 5 sections. 3 chapters focused on each klesha, except the first chapter is an overview of the kleshas of the 8-limb path of yoga, of why this, why now. And then each section ends with practices from the 8-limb path. So each section ends with an asana, a posture, a pranayama practice, a breath work practice or way to control our energy or breath, or to shift our energy through breath, or to shift the patterns in our mind and the way the mind turns through breath and the way that we're breathing, and an awareness of the breath. Each section ends with a mudra, which we're going to work with one of the mudras for one of the kleshas. A mudra is I invited you to move into Anjali Mudra at the beginning, hands the heart center. So it's a position that we embody with our hands in some way. There are many different mudras, and they invoke different sensations, emotions, energies, archetypes. In Anjali Mudra, I invited you to set an intention, which is often the mudra we come to when we set an intention. And again, it's the mudra connected to devotion. And it may be a mudra that many of you are very familiar with. It's the one that I experience being offered the most in spiritual spaces or yoga spaces. But as I said, there are many, many mudras. So pranayama practice, asana, mudra, a meditation, which I led one at the beginning based on avidya, the first klesha, and then a mantra, a mantra, there are different definitions of mantra. Traditionally, historically, a mantra was passed on from teacher to student. So you didn't create your own mantra. A teacher gave you a mantra, and you were supposed to hold that close. In our sort of modern day application of this path of yoga, mantras also sound, traditionally, historically. So these mantras were chanted. And in this application, in this book, in this body of work, mantras are to invoke different energies and archetypes and deities, and to move energy, I would say. And so they can feel like affirmations. They can be spoken or sung, and we'll work with, my glasses just fell, another pair of them. We'll work with one of the mantras today if we have time near the end and before questions. So that's just an overview of the book. So you understand more about the flow of it. And I'm going to share more about the kleshas now, so that we have some understanding, and then I'll circle back and we'll move through some different practices focused on each klesha. So let me share my screen. All the buttons, y'all. There are like so many buttons to push when you share a screen, but hopefully you can see something. Yep, thanks for the thumbs up, Chloe. So this is a picture from the book, actually, of one of the images and practices. And I have my hands together in Anjali Mudra, although they're on my third eye, which is the energy center and chakra center connected to vision, to that dreaming in some ways that I was talking about, to opening up this space so we can see more clearly, which very much relates to the kleshas. So the kleshas show up in different lineages. In Buddhism, we have the kleshas. In the path of yoga and the Yoga Sutras, we have the kleshas. There is a lot of overlap between those two paths and the kleshas. The kleshas are, as I've named, connected to the root causes of our suffering. So often they're explained as the reasons why we suffer individually and collectively. And the particular path of yoga that I've been practicing for many years and worked with to offer this body of work focused on the kleshas and coming back to the true nature of who we are is from the Yoga Sutras, which some of you may be familiar with. So sutra, which is S-U-T-R-A, means thread. And the sutras, and I used different interpretations and translations of the sutras. There are the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. There's a lot I could say about how they maybe came into being and perhaps who Patanjali was. I'll not do that right now, because there are different myths and stories about how these kleshas came to be. I mean, how the sutras came to be. And I believe there are 196 sutras, and they are threaded together. And in the Yoga Sutras, there are 4 books, and they're called padas, P-A-D-A. And pada means foot. So there are 4 feet. And you can even feel into the energy of your feet and connection and like roots and the anchoring that can happen through the feet. And this is how I think about the padas in the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras are essentially a guide for how we live our lives, an invitation to live our lives in a spiritually based way, an invitation to back into practice and interconnection, and really the truth of what is going on, in addition to the truth of what might be playing out in front of what we can see with our eyes, right? There are these other experiences that are happening in multiple realms of experience, and I named multiple layers to self. And so actually book 4 in the Yoga Sutras, it talks a lot about astral travel and how we access these other realms of experience. And, you know, ultimately, the 2 texts that I work with the most, I would say, I work with many, but the most are the Bhagavad Gita, which I love. I'm like in a just such a deep relationship with the Bhagavad Gita, because it makes me light up, and it aligns with my energy of what are we going to do given that we have a space here now on the planet. How do we want to use the space we have, the energy we have, and how do we connect to purpose and really actionable yoga? The other text I work with the most is the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So different than the Yoga Sutras differ a little bit from the Bhagavad Gita, although I think there is so much overlap as I've studied and worked with both now. But I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita is more sort of actionable yoga, but I would also say the Yoga Sutras are too. The Yoga Sutras can feel like more of a sort of personal application of the practice and the 8-limb path, but there's really no way to practice yoga without, in my opinion and experience of it, without having an impact on the outer world, and without yoga affecting your relationship not only to self but to others, not only to humans but the more than human world. That while the practice may traditionally have been passed on from one teacher to one student, obviously in many places it's practiced differently now, many of the places where I teach and practice, but you know, traditionally from one teacher to one student, still there was an offering to live a yogic life. And if we're living a yogic life, and I'll share some about that, but I have many thoughts about that. I'm not saying there's one way to live a yogic life, but if we're living a yogic life, then we are tuned into and attuned to and tapped into what is happening, not only in this particular present moment and around us, but also what has been, right? We're part of a long line and lineage of experience from the past, now, and into the future, which I named in the meditation. The other thing about the Yoga Sutras, where the kleshas come from, is that you know, I have 2 teachers that talk about the Yoga Sutras as a, and it really makes sense, or hopefully it will when I explain more about the kleshas, that the Yoga Sutras are actually a pathway for us to when we leave our physical bodies, to do that with more ease. And actually one of the kleshas is very much connected to that, the 5th klesha, Abhinivesha, which I'll dive into. And they're all spelled on some slides that are coming up. But that it's, you know, if we're living this yogic lifestyle, if we're working with the turning in the mind, if we're working with perception of self and others, and if we're working with different realms of experience, if we're devoted to practice, if we're devoted to self-study, if we're devoted to, I'm thinking about Kriya Yoga right now, which is part of what is introduced in the first book of the Yoga Sutras. tapas, which is heat, and it's one of the niyamas, which is part of the 8-limb path. It's the second limb of the 8-limb path. Tapas is like perseverance, that we engage that energy, that we are committed to self-reflection and self-study, not just to learn more, but again, if we're living a yogic lifestyle, there's some impact on our relationships with the outer world. And actually, it's not even an outer world because there's no separation. And then the third part of Kriya Yoga is Ishvara Pranadhana, which is devotion to something bigger, to spirit, is how it's translated, to God. It's how it's translated in the Yoga Sutras. And we can think about having different Ishvaras, different energies, deities that we pray to, that we make offerings to, where we are reverent. And so the idea behind the Yoga Sutras is for us to engage in deep practice and this path so that there is less clinging when it is time for us to leave these incarnations of self, the incarnations we are embodying right now in this particular moment. And there are so many different practices in it. So that's a little background about the kleshas, and I'm going to put up one of the sutras in just a moment that explains the relationship between kleshas, which is often translated as obstacles, root causes of our suffering, samskaras, which are patterns of its patterned behavior, and karma, which is action and consequence. This is a quote from the book about the kleshas taking root because of our inability to remember our true nature and connection with all beings. As I said, there are 5 kleshas. The first one is avidya, and the other ones take root and sort of sprout and grow from avidya. And I would say that we all suffer from each one of these kleshas in some way, and that there's an opportunity for us to work with them. But at the root of the root of the root, which is one of my favorite sayings, like when we get to the core of it, the part of what happens because of our patterning, because of our trauma, because of what we aren't aware of, because of what humans manifest, right? Which there's an entire chapter about manifesting hate, right? And what that comes from because of our conditioning, that we forget. And there's this illusion that we are not connected to all things and all beings, and we forget who we are. I talk about this in many ways in my work. And at the root, this is why we suffer, that we forget our relationship to all things. And with that, I would say that we forget nature and the order of things. And I think humans, and myself included in this, I forget my place. The amount of times, and I've written a lot about this in Illuminating Our True Nature, there's a lot of more than human world in it, nature. The amount of times that I have been in a place in connecting with the more than human world and realized how insignificant I really am. I'm not saying that to shrink myself. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that because I'm small in comparison to the vastness of the cosmos, right? And all that exists in this realm that I get to move in. And as I said earlier, I get to have space here now. So what do I want to do with it? But that might resonate, if I've hiked on to the top of a big mountain and I'm looking out, I realize how very small I am, how short life really is. And for me in particular, given who I am, just how I'm made up, and I would say given the ancestral influences from my mother and my grandmother in particular, grandmothers and many others, that when I have that moment of I'm insignificant, right? Life is short. I turn to what do I want to do with it? What do I want to make of this? What do I want to offer because I'm in relationship to all things? And what can I practice that will help me really return to the truth of who I am and remember that? And how can that memory, right, that process of remembering, allow me to be more aligned with nature? My true nature, but nature, which we're not actually separate from. So I just wanted to begin there. So this is the sutra that, it's Sutra 2.12. So remember I said the Yoga Sutras, there are 4 books, padas. The kleshas, obstacles, are explained in the second pada or book. The kleshas are explained, and you all probably know this from spiritual teachings, and I'm doing it here, that often, and this is very much true in the Bhagavad Gita and ancient texts and the Yoga Sutras, that there's this way that in different translations of the sutras, someone will translate one of the sutras and then they'll translate the next sutra, and they'll be the same meaning and message, really, but it's said in a different way. So part of practice is through repetition. And this is certainly how the Yoga Sutras are structured. And I think that's not only for repetition and practice and devotion and discipline and rigor in our practice, it's also for integration, so that we can hear things differently, and then they might land, and settle, and we understand them. And so Yoga Sutra 2.12 says, obstacles, which again are the kleshas, are the breeding ground for tendencies, samskaras. Samskaras are patterns of, I mentioned pattern, behaviors that take root, that we may be conscious of or unconscious of, particularly if it's an old pattern and we just think we operate that way, or even confuse behavior with the truth of who we are. So obstacles, the kleshas, are the breeding ground for tendencies, pattern behavior, samskaras. And these obstacles, which I'm going to explain in a moment, and these tendencies, so tendencies arise from these obstacles, and the tendencies are related to what the energy of the klesha, right? So avidya is about a lack of clear sight and this belief that we're separate. We create, and it certainly creates obstacles for us individually and collectively, which I'm sure everyone is feeling in some way right now. And because of avidya and how alive it is, and because it is the root, we create behaviors around this belief that we're separate, or our inability to see clearly. When I say see clearly, I mean attune to notice what is going on and what is real and what is not real. That's the illusion, right? These tendencies give rise to actions, it's supposed to say, and the consequences thereof. So the tendencies give rise to karma. And karma is talked about in so many ways, some of which do not resonate with me at all, because often karma is like a weaponized word that, like, karma, that happened. Karma is action, and then another action, like a consequence to that action, a response to that action is another way you can think about it. Not always a negative thing. And each one of us is working with karma. And if you believe in this, which I do, that we come in with karma that we work on, and unless we're able to work on that and become fully enlightened, right, we come back in, incarnated again in some form and shape, and being, and we have another opportunity to work on karma, and in particular to work on our tendencies and these root causes of our suffering. The other part of this sutra is that obstacles are experienced as visible or invisible. So I mentioned some are conscious to us, the klesha, some behaviors are conscious or unconscious. This is also true of the kleshas, especially because of illusion and how much practice it takes to see clearly. To be like, that is real, that is not real. That is chaos that manifested from human behavior. This over here is chaos that happens naturally in the more than human world and is generative, for example, right? What is happening, and some discernment around what is happening, I would say, in a culture. And when I say culture, often what I'm referring to are dominant cultural norms and conditioning, which we can think about samskaras, tendencies, as conditioning, things I have internalized, right? Things people have told me about who I am or who others are, experiences that I've had, ancestral trauma that is moving through me. And so as I think about the culture I've grown up in and been influenced by, I'm living in a culture that has really conditioned me not to see clearly, not to be discerning, not to ask, is that human-made chaos? Is it generative, or is it cultivating more suffering? And what's the difference between human-made chaos and naturally occurring chaos in the more than human world? So all that to say, there's an invitation with the kleshas to explore our conditioning and to question what we've internalized, narratives, and to interrogate behaviors. But the other thing to know about the kleshas and samskaras and karma is that what happens in book 2 of the kleshas is that sutras are explored and explained and translated about each klesha, about the connection between the kleshas. So this is just one sutra, Sutra 2.12. There are many others that say the same thing. And what comes after the explanation of the kleshas, our root causes of suffering, is the 8-limb path, the path of Ashtanga yoga. That is what is shared in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra as, and after book 1, which has Kriya Yoga, and I'll explain why in a moment, but my understanding of it, after the kleshas, there's the 8-limb path, and this is what you practice to work through the kleshas, to better understand how they're showing up, to find that mukti or moksha, which I mentioned at the meditation, liberation, to connect to that, maybe. For a moment, we connect to that and we feel into that, to understand tendencies and patterns, to have more, I would say, gain more information and clarity about the karma we're working with individually and collectively, and ultimately to practice this 8-limb path, I think, so that we can transmute, which is a word I use all the time. I probably overuse it. I love the energy of transmutation, but to transmute karma, right? To heal wounds, to create new tendencies that are rooted in something other than suffering. I say liberation, but you might have another word that you would use for that. I mentioned Kriya Yoga a little while ago and just a moment ago, and the 8-limb path. I also mentioned that in ancient texts, there are translations of the same message over and over. And so essentially what Patanjali did is said, Kriya Yoga, this is the path. I mentioned the things earlier. Tapas, perseverance, heat, passion, right? I would say rigor and devotion goes into this. I mentioned self-study, svadhyaya, which is reflection, self-reflection and self-study, but not study just so you can read a bunch of books, right? Study in service of something. And Ishvara Pranadhana, which devotion to God, again, literally translated from the kleshas, or spirit, or something that's bigger. Patanjali introduces that as like, this is the path. This is what you do, the end of book 1 and the sutras. But I also think there was wisdom in this path about how difficult it can be to practice, and how difficult it can be, I'm going to put this in quotes, to master a practice, because I don't think I've mastered anything, right? So that's why I'm doing that, right? And so there's also this, this happens in the Bhagavad Gita too. If you can't sit and focus your attention and have single pointed focus in meditation, try this other thing. And I think that part of what was happening in the Yoga Sutras before the kleshas is like, Kriya Yoga is the path, and here are the reasons why we suffer, and then understanding about how difficult it is to practice. And here's the 8-limb path. All of the parts of Kriya Yoga are part of the 8-limb path. But Patanjali was sort of pulling those 3 practices to the top, saying like, this is what we practice to get free. And here's the full path of yoga to work with these tendencies and better understand them. So I'm just going to open the chat for a moment before I go further. Thank you, Meryl, for putting that in there. Okay. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more, and then I'm going to invite us into the body and some practices to work with each one of these kleshas, and then open it up for questions. And as you can tell, I get really excited about talking about the kleshas because I think they're it, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. Avidya is the first one. Lack of clear sight, a belief we are separate. I named that. In yoga philosophy, there is something called Maya, M-A-Y-A, which is illusion. And part of what we're doing through practice is clearing away what needs to be shed so we can return to the truth of who we are. And so we, as I named earlier, can see clearly and break through illusion. In a culture that many of us have been shaped by that wants us to stay numb, disassociate, and be rote in our actions and thoughts and behaviors, and to not tune in. I feel like I was talking to a friend earlier today about this and how sometimes I zoom way out and I'm like, what are we doing? Right? Like when I'm on my cell phone and watching something on Netflix and doing one other task all at the same time, like what am I doing? Like what are we actually doing? And I don't mean that, like we have stuff to do, but I feel like I'm conditioned to be distracted instead of to be tuned into what's real, what needs attention, and my purpose. And so Avidya is lack of clear sight, belief we are separate, which again, I've named that we're probably all feeling into, and there are things that we need to do to remove this illusion, because there is no separation. So everything that I do, everything that I say, every part of who I am and how I express myself has an impact in some way. I'm gonna let this person in. And so it's important for me to do as much as I can do and practice what I can to remember that, because it calls me into being a different person and it calls me into relationship. Asmita is the second klesha. It is an over-identification with the ego. That's often how it's translated. There's a lot of written about ego and different parts of the ego. And I would also say asmita is it's connected to identities too, which is something I've gone into in the book, that we confuse our identities with the whole of who we are. And this is part of the forgetting and the reason why we need to remember. But Ashmita is really about I-ness, ego, me. And what I've offered in this is we, right? This connection. And what does it mean to remember that? Raga is attachment to pleasure. It is the third klesha. It is complicated. This is what I say all the time. Each one of them is complicated, but I think pleasure in particular is complicated because most of the people I know, and myself included, have a complex relationship with pleasure and messaging around who deserves to feel pleasure and who does not, and what is pleasurable, and decisions around that. And but at the core, raga is about experiencing something we perceive as pleasurable and then wanting to recreate that pleasurable experience. And at, I would say, its sort of fullest expression, wanting to recreate the pleasurable experience because we don't want to feel pain, and that we forget, right, that pleasure and emotions and sensations are temporary. They're passing. And there's a way we can become addicted to, I want that vacation that I'm going on next year to feel the same way as the last vacation felt. And when it doesn't, that causes some suffering for us. Or I want that experience to feel pleasurable. And I only want to feel pleasure, right? Because I want to avoid things that bring me pain. That's the energy of raga. Devesha is translated as aversion or avoidance. And I think about devesha a lot. I was talking about it earlier today. I think about all of the kleshas a lot, but devesha is, I've just been sitting with it a lot lately. I would say over the last year, more pronounced. And the idea behind devesha is that, well, we come in with karma. And I also mentioned, and I would say part of that's our ancestral memories and trauma, and also resilience. I want to name that too. And as people on the planet right now, we have experiences that shape us. And we might experience people we would label as, annoying, or we dislike them. Or we might experience things that may not have anything to do with other humans that we become averse to because it disrupts us in some way, right? It stirs something inside us. What I was talking about earlier today is the parts of ourselves that we might label as shadow, that we don't want to look at because they don't feel good. So the idea behind devesha is these impressions are made in the mind due to experiences we have. And some of which I just named, but there are a lot more experiences we have. And so if I have an experience with someone that I would say, oh, I don't like that behavior they engage in, right? And then I have another experience and somebody reminds me of that person, right? And their behavior that I've labeled as, disliking. Then the impression becomes deeper and deeper and deeper, to the point where at its fullest expression of devesha, that I want to avoid at all costs people who annoy me in whatever way it might be, and that I want to annihilate that which I do not like. Which I would say, I don't know that I need to say any more about that. That's happening on a collective scale in so many different ways right now. This annihilation of that which we perceive as disliking or less than, or because of a hierarchy of bodies, and also the human body to earth, that hierarchy too. It's happened, this extraction we do with the earth, this exploitation, this taking without really understanding that's where we come from. So there's a lot to devesha. The final klesha, which I mentioned earlier, is abhinivesha. And abhinivesha is often translated as a fear of death or fear of letting go. I mentioned the kleshas build upon one another. So if we believe we're separate, there's a way then we are conditioned to be focused on the ego and I and our individual desires. That is also connected to wanting to only feel pleasure and to avoid pain, coupled with wanting to avoid that which we do not like, because I'm not related to that which I do not like. So I'm separate from that. And what I need and what I desire matters the most. And really, I want to feel pleasure and I want to feel good. And I don't want to feel things that make me feel uncomfortable or scratch me, right, energetically, or stir something inside me that makes me question who I am and how I'm showing up. Then we can see the fifth klesha, abhinivesha. All of this energy of the other kleshas leads to clinging behavior, holding on, a fear of leaving these physical bodies, a fear of letting go of a relationship, a fear of any transition we move through. And, I've written about this quite literally in the book related to death and the culture around. I have been conditioned to think about life. It has been a learning for me to reflect on death and to reflect on what I want after I die, if I have any say over that, meaning how I want people to, what I would like for people to do, right, in response. There has been a conditioning around avoiding death and prolonging life at times when it doesn't serve the person who may, or the experience that may need to dissolve. And I will say, for any of you who practice yoga, the asana that I've offered for Abhinivesha is Shavasana, which is corpse pose. It's no mistake that in most asana movement posture practices, and in meditation practices, I would say, that we practice dissolution, that we are invited to die, right? To practice dying in some way. And in Shavasana, if we're going to reemerge and reawaken from that state, right? We come back and reawaken, that there is this invitation to let go of, right? What we no longer need to hold on to even let go of the sense of self. Because often our sense of self is rooted in ego and these other kleshas. So to drop that and be able to dissolve into all of time and space, you can take this further, right? Dissolving and feeling that sense of connection and union with all things and enlightenment, if any of us ever feel that, right? Which may be a stretch for many of us. So it's no mistake that that's the offering, that's the way in most asana classes that we end. Because we need a lot of practice so that when we actually die physically, which I named that the Yoga Sutras are this guide and teacher for how to do that, to free ourselves of these other kleshas, to free ourselves of samskaras and tendencies that create more suffering. Because the other thing about the Yoga Sutras and the kleshas is, the philosophy says that when we are reincarnated, the moment we come into being, that we bring our karma with us and that we feel it and it's painful. And then there's this opportunity for us to work with these kleshas again and our root causes of suffering. So there are 55 other things I could say about this, but I really just wanted to offer an overview for anybody who may not understand the kleshas, but also to add my, this is how I think about the kleshas. And I want to say before I'm going to invite us to move into maybe two postures. You don't need anything for that, as I named earlier. I might invite a little bit of a flow with the arms or the breath in that. And then I'll invite us into, I think, a pranayama practice and work with a mudra before I open it up for questions. But what I want to say is that the reason anybody here who knows me knows that I'm not shy about talking about suffering. I'm not saying my way of talking about it is the way. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just not shy about it because I feel like it's like the essential work that we need to do, however we choose to do that. It may feel more difficult, and it is in service of liberation in the way that I named earlier when I shared about why I'm here and what I'm up to in the world, and how I show up. And so it's not just that I want us to understand why we're suffering. I want us to do that so that there's less suffering, which would, the conclusion of that is that there's a little more freedom for us, maybe a lot, and not just individually, because that's related to Ashmita, ego, right? But the planet, the collective, all that we are a part of. So I want to name that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to, in just a moment, I'm just deciding what asana I want to offer. I think I'm going to offer a really steady one focused on avidya. I mean, yes, a belief that we're separate. And let me stop sharing this. Okay. So I'm going to invite you to, you can be as you are. I'm standing. You can sit for this. There are different variations in the book. And I'll just move back a little bit so you can maybe see me standing.
You might not be able to see my feet. It gets a little dark back here. I'm going to invite you. I said so many words, and so I'm just going to invite you to tune back in to your breath. You might close your eyes again. You might soften your gaze. And take a few deep breaths here. And I'm going to invite you, as you breathe, to move into what is called Tadasana, mountain pose. And again, you could be in a chair seated, or you could be standing with your feet firmly planted on the earth. The meditation I offered at the beginning is focused on avidya, lack of clear sight, and calling us back into connection to all things. And Tadasana is the posture I offer in the section about avidya. And Tadasana is mountain pose. So I invite you to find your expression of mountain pose. And you might ground through your feet or your seat. If you're seated, your hands might be on your thighs, or arms by your side, or hands on your chair. If you're standing, arms can be down by your sides. The fingertips can reach down as you ground through your feet. You can reach up through the crown of your head. And I offer this asana, this posture, so we can really breathe into the energy flowing through us with the inhales and exhales, and firmly root down into the truth that we are connected to all things. So regardless of the weather, right, if we think about mountain and the experiences mountains have, right, the weather that affects them, that we return to this place of steadiness and truth and clear sight. And take a few breaths here, and as you're breathing it in, I invite you to feel the energy move up from the feet all the way through the body to the crown of your head and beyond. And as you breathe out, I invite you to feel the breath empty from the body and the energy to move back down to your feet or your seat. Finding some steadiness here through the posture, the effort you're putting into, which is called stira, S-T-I-R-A. The effort you're putting into embodying this posture of steadiness, of groundedness, of reconnection, right? And feeling the flow of the breath, which is a reminder that everything is temporary. Both our pleasurable experiences or things we would label as pleasurable, the things we might label as unpleasant, or the things we want to avoid, or the things we might label as negative. All of it's temporary, and we can feel this with each cycle of breath, every inhale and exhale. The building, the birthing of the breath, and then the emptying and the release and the letting go. The breath, as we hold this posture, actually allows us to work with all of the kleshas in some way, right? Returning to this continuum of breath, and that we are connected to all things, feeling this as we inhale. And as we do, feeling our connection to all things, releasing this conditioning of I-ness, I need, I am. Moving into the energy of we are, coming into union, which is, the essence of why many of us practice. Feeling the temporary nature of the breath in the body, the fall and rise, the shape change in the body as you breathe in and breathe out. Again, raga and devesha, working with these energies. And from a place of working toward union, releasing some of this energy that can be focused on wanting to annihilate that which we do not like. And then at the bottom of every exhale, the release, an opportunity to practice abhinivesha, letting go. Being in that pause between the bottom of an inhale, the beginning of an exhale. Take a few more breaths here, and then I'll invite in some movement. You can decide if you want to stay steady in mountain pose as you are, or if you'd like to flow a bit with this energy of the building of the breath, the release of the breath, this practice with building, being in the energy of that, being in the energy of remembering we're connected to all things, and then releasing that breath, right? The clinging, the gripping, the letting go. And so you can stay seated or standing. I'll invite you to inhale and reach your arms all the way out and up, and to drop the shoulders as you reach up through your fingertips. And now to exhale and cactus your arms. This is one of the asanas I've offered in the book in response to Ashmita, over identification with ego. And I'll invite you to stay here for another breath, to open up, draw the shoulder blades in towards your spine. You can even open up through the heart here, lifting the heart center. And taking a deep breath in and noticing the heart as it opens, and the energy that it takes, right, to open the heart and draw the shoulder blades in towards your spine, tapping into that collective energy, the heart of all things. Take another breath here. And I'll invite you to inhale and reach back up. And then to exhale, draw your hands into your heart center, back into Anjali Mudra, the mudra for avidya. Returning to the heart, your intention, your prayer, and your blessing. And then as you inhale to reach all the way up, we'll do this one more time. And as you exhale, cactusing your arms, bend your elbows, spread your fingers wide. Stay here for another breath. Notice the heart now. And inhale, reaching all the way up. And then as you exhale, just flowing the temporary nature of things, hands to your heart center. This time I'm going to invite you to inhale and reach all the way up. And as you exhale, to cactus your arms. Take another deep breath in here. We're going to flow a little bit more to be in this temporary nature of things. As you exhale, you could round in and bring your forearms toward one another. And then as you inhale, you can open. So we're playing with expansion and contraction. And then you can close here, rounding in, coming in, and then opening up. And just notice the difference and the pause between the breaths and the movements in the body. The different sensations as we expand and open, or we contract, or round in. 2 more times if you're playing in this way. And then as you feel ready, you can open all the way up, reach the arms up, bring the hands back to the heart center. Taking a moment here, taking a deep breath in and a complete breath out. And now releasing your arms down by your sides, coming back into mountain for a moment, reconnecting. And I'm going to invite us into a pranayama practice, which is really to work with devesha, which I talked some about. And devesha, again, is the klesha focused on aversion or avoidance. The pranayama practice, I'll explain to you, you may be familiar. And then after it, we're going to work with one mudra, and then I'll open it up for a conversation and questions. And I want to say there's a lot more in the book, but I wanted to offer context in a few practices from the book. So with the meditation, the mudra, a little bit of flow with the breath, that steadiness in mountain, and now alternate nostril breathing, which is Nadi Shodhana, is the name of it. And it is the pranayama practice that I offer in response to devesha, aversion or avoidance. There are a few ways to practice it. The way you can practice it is you can come into, the mudra is combined in this section. You can come into Vishnu mudra,
which is where your thumb is up, fourth finger, which my wrist doesn't love when I do that, and pinky. It's from typing and writing many books on the computer. So you can do Vishnu Mudra, which this is imperfect because my hand doesn't want to move into it. Or you can have your thumb and your pinky and work. It's called alternate nostril breathing. So, or if you don't want any mudra, you can work with the right side and the left side, which is what we're going to work with. The reason Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, is the practice, the pranayama practice for Devesha, is it is a balancing breath. And when we are so distressed or disturbed by that which we do not like, and we're trying to avoid it, there's a lot of imbalance and inflammation. And this is a calming and cooling breath. And it's a breath to bring us back into balance. And so that's why it's the pranayama practice. So you decide Vishnu Mudra, or thumb and pinky, or no mudra at all. So the way we're going to do this is your eyes can be closed if you would like, or soft gaze. I'm just going to invite you to take a full round of breath, an inhale and an exhale. And I'll invite you with your thumb, if you're using it, to close off the right side and inhale through the left. Close both nostrils. And then when you feel ready, open the right side and exhale through the right. Inhale through the right side in your own time. You close at the top. When you feel ready, exhale through the left. We'll continue this way, inhaling through the left, holding at the top, exhaling through the right. Inhaling through the right, holding at the top, exhaling through the left. Continue this way for a few rounds. Inviting in balance. The next time you breathe out of the left side, you can release the mudra. And just take a moment to notice. Again, it's a calming, cooling breath to bring about balance, so less disturbance and distress and inflammation. And from this place, I'm going to offer one more mudra, which is Abhya Mudra. And I'll step back. You can do this seated often, as this is how we would do it, but I want to explain it so you can know. If you want to practice it, you can lift your right hand and draw the right thumb in close. Again, my body only will move a certain way. So as close as you can get, this right hand. The left hand is palm face up on your left thigh. If you're often, again, we do this seated. And so I'm just going to do it standing like this for a moment, but you could sit and either in a chair on the earth and have the left hand, back of the hand and wrist and arm on your thigh as you hug the right hand in. If you don't want to hold this mudra, you can breathe and feel the energy of this. This is actually a mudra that is representative of fearlessness.
which is the mudra I offer in response to abhinivesha, fear of death, and letting go. So I'm going to invite you to take a few rounds of breath in this energy of fearlessness, this mudra, which invokes fearlessness. And you might notice that both hands are actually open. One palm face up, one facing out. So there's some receptivity here as there's energy to hold this right arm in close and to keep the left palm open. I can notice getting hot. There's heat building. Just notice what's happening for you. Taking another breath here. Then as you feel ready, you can release. You might notice the release and shake anything out that needs to shake out.
Yeah. And I want to name that we just did like maybe 5 of the practices throughout our time together. There are actually 25 practices in the book, so it's just a taste. And many of them we would hold for longer. The Abhya Mudra we would hold for 5 to 10 minutes if we could, or the energy of fearlessness. Again, you don't have to hold it, right? Make it accessible. Alternate nostril breathing we would have done a little bit longer than we did, right? And so this is just a taste. And I'd love, with the few minutes we have left, to open it up for any questions that you might have. You can unmute and speak the question into the space if you would like, or if you want to put it in chat, I'm happy to speak to it in the space. Also want to thank you all for being here. But if there are any questions for me, please let me know.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I think when I saw that you were presenting here, I did get the book, and when I started the book, and I'm only at the beginning, I was struck by the parallels between Buddhism and the Yoga Sutras. And it's like, what came first and what influenced what, and I guess it's all mixed in together. So, and I noticed that I had another book following on this. It's called Freeing the Body, Freeing the Mind, related to practices of Buddhism and yoga. And Patanjali was writing maybe like 500 years after Buddha. But I mean, have you tried to sort this out in your own mind, or have you just kind of focused on the yoga path? How much have you explored Buddhism yourself? I'm working with Soto Zen in my own experience. And there's so many different experiences of Buddhism. So I'm just curious what your process has been in terms of dealing with exploring both.
That's a great question, Carolyn. I have primarily studied the path of yoga and have many Buddhist teachers that I'm drawn to. And so I would say I have mentors and teachers that are Buddhists that I look up to and work with and sit with. And the deep dive has been through the path of yoga. And initially the deep dive was more of a physical exploration of that, but then I was introduced to the full path, which is actually how I know a lot of people that I'm in relationship with come into yoga, and then they realize it's actually something that's much bigger than, right, physical postures. And I think when I came to it, I was already I came to yoga a long time ago, actually, when I was a teenager, but And I don't exactly know how that happened, but when I was 14, I was practicing asanas and meditation and didn't know the name for them or what they were called until much later. But I was seeking healing, and I was seeking answers, and also spaces where we could talk about the teachings and contextualize them to do something with them. Again, not only to heal ourselves, but the collective. I mean, that's my orientation. And so, and part of that came from, you know, when I went through my first yoga teacher training, I was already a racial equity educator, an activist. And so it was like, that was the way I entered in. And many of the principles of Buddhism, they're actually in some of my other books. There is a lot of overlap, but I've mainly studied the path of yoga and haven't. I trust the wisdom, and I also trust there's so much I don't know. And so I will be the first to acknowledge that, and will be a student of the path of yoga, and actually probably many other paths for the whole of my life, I hope. So I haven't sat and tried to like sort it out very much. It's more been intuitive and trusting and deep study, and practicing what it is that I'm searching for, which is, what do these teachings mean for me, Michelle, now? Not in an egoic way, but what do they call me into, is what I would say. So thanks, Carolyn. Anyone else? Thanks, Marilyn. Anyone else have a question? I know we're right at time. Okay. Marilyn, I recognized you when you came on, but I was like, I don't know how we know each other, but now I do. So hello. Yeah. I was like, I know this person and I don't know how. I'm going to put one link in the, which you may all have. I'm not sure what was shared. I'm just gonna put a link to my website because there's more information about who I am on that. And I do a lot of different things and have a lot of online offerings and in-person offerings. And if something that I have said, you know, speaks to you, feel free to connect with me there. I also send out a newsletter often twice a month, sometimes a little bit more, but twice a month, that I know some of you read. And so that's there if you want to stay connected in that way and see what I'm present to at the time. And I want to thank you all for being here, and Zen Peacemakers again for inviting me to be in this space. And I'll offer my prayer blessing, which is, may all beings everywhere be safe, happy, and free. And may our thoughts, words, and actions contribute to that safety, happiness, and freedom for all. May our world be just, and may we all find peace. Many, many blessings to you all, and blessed be.